We're live.
Okay, we're live. So we're back after a quick break. Senate Education Committee on the 10th of February. Just sort of continuing this little segment we're going to do is to make sure the committee understands, nothing else, the difference between announced and allowable tuition. From we're going to be hearing, I suspect, more about as we go forward here. And some things are based on announced tuition, and which is very different than allowable tuition, and sometimes the two get conflated and not people don't understand the difference between the two, and that's what the committee does. So asked the education department to help us with this. And so we have Ted Gates, I like themselves for the Agency of Education. So why don't we haven't had you in here at least recently, have we?
I was here last week, but I always said
You were here, but
two things. Yeah.
yeah, okay. So over there we have Senator Ron Instead.
Not a machine, Wyndham County.
Good afternoon, Dave Weeks, Rutland County.
Seth Walker, Bennington Senate District.
Terry Williams, also Rutland County.
Steve Heffernan, Addison County District.
So then introduce yourself for the record. The floor is yours.
Okay. I'm Tom Puzo, the Deputy CFO at the Agency of Education.
And Ted Gates, Senior Fiscal Analyst, Agency of Education.
So I can see, I can tell already you're going to speak up.
Yeah, he'll do most of the talking.
Okay.
Well, good afternoon. So talking about announced versus allowable tuition. So you're going through the slide deck. First, we can define some terms. Talking about tuition. A district can either be a sending district or a receiving district. So depending if they send children or receive children, and sometimes they can do both, particularly like with tech centers or schools that operate a district that operates a tech center. So a receiving district, this is just kind of a rough summary of how the process works. So a receiving district announces their tuition rates, and in statute, sometimes that's termed calculated net costs. So they announce those by January 1st.
So just to make sure everybody's on the page here.
15.
When we talk about tuition, we're talking about both to independent schools and to public schools that
Yes.
receive tuition from
Yes.
other districts.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So the receiving districts announced tuition by January 15th for the following school year. So it's only January 15th, a couple weeks ago, they were announcing their tuition for next fall. So we'll call that the tuition year. So then when the tuition year is completed, the AOE calculates what's called the allowable tuition, which in statute is often called net cost per pupil, or formerly it was called that. And we do that based on the submitted expenditure and revenue data that we receive from what we call the stat book data, the expenditures and revenues that they submit to us every summer. We adhere to the statutory and state board rules for how to do those calculations. And then we publish the allowable tuition by statute by November 1st, which is about 21 months after the districts first calculated their announced tuition. So there's a long lag time here. Then if the allowable tuition that we calculate is plus or minus 3% different from the original announced tuition, then districts shall true up with each other through either payments or credits. There's some statute around that. Okay. This page just mentions some of the areas in the statute where there are rules surrounding the tuition rates. And then the state board rules also have some set of guidelines for how to actually do that calculation. So that's the news. So high level again, the tuition rates are actually calculations. So it's the net instructional costs, so specific costs divided by the number of students. The tuition rates that we use are calculated at the district level and not the school. Sometimes that can be the same thing. You know, the district just operates one school, but it's a district-wide tuition rate. And then the allowable tuition that we calculate, the AOE, is only calculated obviously for public school districts because we don't collect expenditure and revenue data from private schools. And then some notes on the denominator, the per pupil part. The state board rules define allowable tuition, the denominator as FTE, student membership. So the FTE is calculated using the end of year student data collection, what's called DC-04. So, for example, if a student is enrolled for the entire school year, their FTE would be 1.0. If a student is only enrolled in a school for half the year, their FTE would be 0.5, etc. The total FTE for a school will not be the same as the October 1st enrollment number. It won't be the same as the ADM number that the AOE publishes. So district managers may not know what their FTE numbers are at the end of the year. Most districts don't calculate that themselves. It's something that's done strictly for statute, rather than the AOE, also for federal reporting. Because it's in the denominator, like with many ratios that you've worked with, small changes in the FTE in the denominator can significantly affect the final allowable tuition amount. So that's something to keep in mind. And then the tuition year FTE that we use for allowable tuition cannot be known in advance 21 months earlier. And it's difficult for business managers to estimate that number when they're announcing their tuition 21 months earlier. So there's, again, 21 months of lag time where a lot can happen. In terms of independent schools and other sorts of exceptions to the rules, the statute states that the tuition rate for approved independent schools shall not exceed the average announced tuition of Vermont Union schools, high school, be it elementary or high schools or elementary, depending on which tuition rate we're calculating. And just as a note, union districts at the secondary level account for about 72% of total secondary. So that's most of the kids are in the union district at the secondary level.
So what's that mean? What's the union secondary? That's the 2% of total. What does that mean?
So the allowable rate, the average rate that independent schools use is based on the state average, but it's not the total state average. It's only for union districts, as opposed to like a town district. It's not.
Okay. Okay.
And so I'm just saying that, union districts are most of the kids account for most. Also, school districts may enter into tuition agreements with each other for agreed upon tuition amounts that don't adhere to the calculations that come out of the AOE. Provided that they offer that same tuition rate to all districts that send students to their schools. And the AOE does not track which districts use those agreements, so we don't have any insight into that data. So the actual calculation, we calculate two different rates, one for elementary students, K through 6, and then another rate for each district for grades 7 through 12. So to calculate each rate, we use the actual district expenditures that we need to be, and we need those expenditures to be identified in the data as either elementary or secondary. So in the uniform chart of accounts that school districts are supposed to use for their accounting, there is a code called level, which designates whether those costs are identified as elementary or secondary. There's other level codes for pre-K or post-secondary. However, some expenses, if you think about it, can't practically be split into elementary or secondary, like administration or facilities. And so we have a separate code for those, a level code called location-wide. And then when we get those location-wide costs, we prorate them down to either elementary or secondary based on the ratio of elementary and secondary students FTEs in the school or the district. Makes sense. And that's kind of complicated, and just be aware of that. So, and then the state board rules dictate specific costs. They can be included or excluded in that calculation. And in the very last slide, there's some statutory language around those rules. So the AOE is required to publish by November 1st, the allowable tuition rates. And preceding that, we produce an online interactive Power BI. It's an application that does online reporting, report that lists the expenditures, the specific expenditures and revenues that are included or excluded from the calculation. And then we share that with district business managers so they have a chance to see how that calculation works and to validate that. The AOE responds to all inquiries from the districts related to their allowable tuition calculations, and then we work through any issues that might be arising from that data or the questions that they would have. And then once the data issues are resolved, the AOE publishes the allowable tuition report on our website. Then by statute, the receiving districts are required to notify the sending districts by December 15th if they overcharge or undercharge by plus or minus 3%. And again, the AOE does not track payments or credits for those overcharges and undercharges. This data shows the announced tuition rates going back to FY16 through FY26, so 10 or 11 years worth of data. The blue line is the lower line is elementary grade announced tuition, and the upper line is secondary grades announced tuition. And then looking at the growth rates over those 10 years, the average growth rate for elementary was about 4.5% per year, and 3.9% average growth for the secondary grades.
The difference in those, what's the gap between the blue and the red or whatever line it is?
$1,000.
So that's about, what percentage is that?
1/16, 6-7% difference, maybe.
So
Call it 5 to 10%.
on that,
maybe.
on the announced side.
On the announcement.
We're about to see the allowable, I take it.
Sadly, no, I didn't make a graph of that, but, and again, this is only union districts, so this is not the statewide, but it's just, it's just, it gets used for that average. But it gives you an idea of what the rates have been doing over time. But to your comment though, I did look at the allowable, I have in the past, I've looked at the allowable rates side by side with the announced rates, and there's wide variation between them, as you can imagine. In fact, only a handful of districts come within that 3% threshold. Both of them are outside the 3% mark, and sometimes by quite a bit.
Yeah, I've seen it be like twice as much.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the allowable, the other way to put it is, allowable is actual.
Yeah.
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 And announced is just the kind of guess at the beginning of the thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And some districts, if you on the closer to minus 3%, they can have their own agreements, right? Exactly.
Yeah, I don't have insight into which districts might do that.
Okay.
This doesn't recognize any, doesn't mix any of the special education funding tuitions.
No, this is
Completely
this is, yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
But what it's actually, if a student does go, a special ed student does go to another district, and then it goes with the special ed, additional dollars follows the student, right? Or they just got the, what is it? What, like when a kid from Grand Isle goes to, because most of them go to other public schools, so the tuition with other public schools. What happens when they are special ed kids?
When they aren't, or
When they
when
are,
special
when they
ed
are.
kids.
Yeah, when they're carrying weights, do the weights go with them?
The weights are applied to the district where the student lives. So that would be, so the weights would go to the sending district.
And to the, but if a special ed student is coming from that district, does the district often pay more than just the allowable tuition, because that's for a non-weighted student, right?
I think in some cases, I'm not an expert on the special ed side, but I think in some cases, certainly if there's excess costs, then those are treated completely differently, but. Yeah, about as much as I can say on that.
Yeah, I don't have any feedback.
Okay. So what's this last slide doing?
So this gives you an idea of how many students. So in the stat book collection, we do a collection called Supplemental Worksheet Number 1, SW1, where districts report the number of students that they have sent to other schools and the amount of tuition that they have paid, and then designate whether it was for private school or public school, in state, out of state. So this gives you an idea of the number of students that have been secondary. This is secondary students only. This is what the sending districts have reported to us. So they sent non-public, which includes independent schools, obviously, in-state 2,600 students, and public school students in-state 2,200 students.
So I just want to be clear while we have you in the witness chair. What we passed in Act 73 means there will be no difference starting some fiscal year in the tuition paid for a non-public school.
I'm not thoroughly well versed in Act 73, but I believe they're just, the tuition at that point would just be the foundation formula amounts.
Okay, so it is contingent on us taking affirmative action on the foundation formula.
So the foundation formula right now, with statutes written, requires that the Baptist and mapping the foundation formula to take that right now. And you're right, by the way, that under the foundation formula, the weighted, the money follows the weighted student.
Right, that's what I was,
So, and so it's uniform.
yes, it's uniform.
Uniform, yeah.
So we still have to do something affirmative,
To make the foundation formula.
okay,
Yeah.
not be non-public out of state, that will end next year.
It's my understanding, well, unless the students are grandfathered in, yeah, it's my understanding that we
Okay.
give a lumber fund out of state.
So it's 96. That the public out of state can continue without, like, those are the, I think, one of those are the essence kids that were one about for the essence testing meeting.
The public out of state,
Yeah,
not the non-public out of state.
right. The non-public out of state is, as you suggest, is ending.
Right.
It's winding down, but the public out of state is continuing. And so here we have that. What we have is within the tuitioning program, as it's going to go, as it exists going forward, it's we have about half the kids who tuition go to public schools, and about half go to independent schools. They will report to the independent, but not
Yeah.
that much. Okay,
Do we know what the 96 non-public, what type of students they are? They're just average?
they're just have their districts. They are kids who are in non-operating districts who use their tuition dollars to go out of state to school.
That's such a minimal amount.
Yeah.
Why we're worried.
Yeah, it's supposed to be pretty minor, but whatever, it's over. So I think. So the key here, the A key is that just as we are understanding these terms, allowable tuition in and of itself doesn't really, it's not reflective of much, except some guess at the beginning of the year. The real number for actual costs is the allowable tuition, not the announcement.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it does come down to how you define the costs, and there are very specific rules about how those costs are defined. I think that might be, yeah, that's our last slide. So I won't read through the whole thing, but it's just an example of some of the statutory language around the costs. So elementary, secondary, it's called current instructional costs, less, so they don't count special ed expenditures eligible for reimbursement, vocational technical costs, expenditures for transportation to and from school for resident students. And then it's reduced again by certain revenues from local sources that serve to offset some or all of the costs of providing service. It also excludes state and federal sources that must be used for a categorical or restricted purpose. So most of the federal money is not counted in the tuition amount. Specifically excluded are expenditures for non-instructional programs such as food service, self-supporting enterprise operations, adult or continuing education programs, community services. And then it also says facilities, acquisitions and constructions is not included, it's excluded. But there's a separate category where business managers can identify certain long-term facility costs, construction costs, debt service that can be included in the cost, but it has to be manually identified by the business manager. So you take the core instructional costs and you actually add the per student facility, long-term facilities costs on it, you get the final allowance tuition. So it's kind of strict how it works. And that is all I have.
Yeah, just a generic question. Do independent schools, approved independent schools, do they receive federal dollars as well as state dollars?
I don't know.
I think some may, if they're working with the districts. And the title, some of it may flow from the district.
Yeah, it's not necessarily a prohibition
I don't think
from
so.
the federal government. Anti-independent school.
Not that I know of.
Yes.
So if the foundation formula takes over, will the publishing allow tuition data kind of disappear? Because we're all on
That would be my guess. Yeah, I would,
your professional opinion, I
yeah,
guess.
I haven't thought about it that deeply yet, but that would be my understanding, yeah.
Okay, because it's possible.
We wouldn't need to calculate anything, or we might keep track of it, you know, how much money is being spent between districts, but we wouldn't need to.
What kind of cost savings would that be up at your department? How many, because there must be hours and hours spent on this.
Oh, cost savings in terms of
Yeah.
not doing this work?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know how much time it would take, but I certainly would be glad to have that time back in my life. That's,
And it's not just you, it's several people.
it's mostly.
Oh, sure. Okay.
But under the, so along those lines, under the with the foundation formula at the base amount of the weights that go to a district, there, it will be theoretically the same at this moment in time for high school and elementary school. It's all of 15033 plus the weights. But districts can allocate that in ways that they want to. So would you still be tracking the actual dollars spent on, like, for instance, 7 through 12 versus elementary? Or would that happen only if something were written into law to make clear on that?
The main reason that we track elementary and secondary right now is for the allowable tuition calculation. There's always somebody who wants to slice the numbers some way like that, so we would probably be prepared. We would still have those level codes for the different grade levels so that we could calculate the cost differences or whatever, but I don't know if there's any reports that we currently do besides allowable tuition.
Have to get the right information in the district about how they're. Okay.
Yeah.
So if we did want that to continue in some fashion, so that we can track the actual dollars spent, at which levels, we would probably want to write something into the bill.
I think so.
Okay. That's,
If you wanted it done on an annual basis at a regular point in time, then yes, yeah.
okay. Okay. Good. Any other questions? Okay.
So you're all experts now.
Yeah. Well, I want to make sure we do the really understand this between announced and allowable. Because it's actually fundamental to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
So let me ask you, actually, since you're still here, do you have any idea or anything, like, in some instances, the announced and the allowable are dramatically different
They can be, yeah.
to you?
They shouldn't, I mean, in theory, they shouldn't be. And
Yeah. But actually, the charts that I've seen really show a lot of districts being significantly over the announced with the allowable. Do you have any sense of what's driving that?
I don't have any insight into how they calculate announced. We supply them with a worksheet so they can identify their instructional costs and they can divide them by the number of students. They're, obviously for smaller districts where they have fluctuations in their student counts from year to year, that could do it.
Or two?
You're gonna run into small numbers problems with small districts.
Yeah.
Or districts that, by statute, maybe they need to produce their announced tuition, but they only expect to receive 1 or 2 students, then it's not that big a deal to them, maybe. So, but I think that for the districts that do a lot of tuition for receiving, I think they try and stay on top of it quite a bit. They're gonna be the districts that are closer to that 3%.
I thought what you were gonna say is that there are some schools where if they're receiving from a non-operating district, they can ask the families to pay more tuition.
Well, that's a whole different, that's a subset of independent schools who do that.
But that would
more about-
end.
I don't remember exactly how it worked out. What I was talking about is the that there's, the announced tuition is what, like, for instance, some of the schools that receive kids from Grand Isle, public schools,
Mhm.
receive kids from Grand Isle, announce a tuition saying, pay us, $13,000.
Mhm.
But after 21 months later, after the whole process, they actually can get paid for the amount that actually, the actual cost versus the announced. Now, there's a parameter of only 3%, but often the actual cost of educate, the allowable tuition is significantly higher
Mhm.
than the announced.
Right.
So this is the real cost.
But then wouldn't we want to end people being able to take the
That's
foundation formula somewhere and then pay the rest?
no,
on
that's a
top?
different issue in the end, but
I hope we end that
yeah,
too.
there's but it's an entirely different issue.
Okay.
This is just making, I was just asking a question about, as it relates to that gap, using Grand Isle as an example of the schools that they pay to. How could it be such a difference? And I think part of your answer is it tends to be a district that only receives 1 or 2 kids.
Yeah,
It's hard to calculate because if they get,
yeah.
but why would that make the ratio? Because the announced tuition, why would it matter if there were 4? Because it's the tuition. If they said 15,000, they got 2, they got still 15,000. What would make it, what would skew it so much that actually costs so much more to educate those kids than they estimated?
There's so many factors.
Yeah, so, okay.
Calculate.
Like an emergency repair, because I know that's what we've heard from some of the schools. Hey, we accept the emergency repairs.
Well, the construction costs are excluded in license, but the business managers have the opportunity to identify specific costs. It's include or not include. I mean, if they did include that, they might.
Okay, well, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. So we're ahead of schedule, but actually, I can see that Jay's here, so we're ready for the next. I don't know whether we should wait till in case people want to watch this and they think it's going to be at 2:30, or just go ahead. Okay, go ahead. We're going to have to take a break anyway because we can't go to our next 3 o'clock meeting until a little bit after 3. So why don't you just come up?
Thanks for that ringing.
Hey, can somebody get that? Yeah.
I got you.
Thanks.
Sure.
So before you start, just to set this up a little bit, we had the schedule largely set, and then all of a sudden, then the maps appear from the house. So we're trying to, take a look at it, and get a sense of what and I will say on the record, what we should have done was have Peter share comment here first. But this was a little technical, bit of a fill in, so we'll get him in to do an introduction to his proposal after for a couple of witnesses. But so this is slightly out of order, but we just had some gaps and we just filled it what we could to since this came kind of quickly. So we all have copies of this the proposal that came out of the House and Education Committee. And we're just trying to get a feel for it. So this is as proposed. The other thing about the maps, I should have had the chair around the first book. We'll take care of that. Is that the accompanying language says effectively that if you look at all of these proposed districts, they are all supervisory districts, the OSUs. So
Okay.
that in mind. So we're gonna over the course of the next couple of weeks just take a lot of tests. And so I think with that, you're the first person here. We're just beginning to get a feel for what the field thinks. And okay.
Great, thanks. So for the record, Jay Nichols, Senior Executive Director of the Vermont Principals Association, and I will say that I just testified using the same language with Representative Congress today. And I was in there testifying about chronic absenteeism. And get down to, they had some time to vote and said, well, aren't you testifying later on? Can you tell us what you're going to say in Senate? I said, sure. So So I'm sharing with you the same, so I share with them. I'm not just fine today on the maps themselves. We just saw the initial stuff last week as you did, and when I first saw it, didn't have the names of towns on it. But we are gonna testify on the language related to it. Be glad to come in later, maybe talk about the maps, although I'd like to stay out of the map business as much as possible, senators, if we can. So first of all, we want to thank Representative Conlon for putting out a thoughtful map for his committee. Obviously, many other Vermonters, including Senate Education, to consider. It's hard to tell where we're going to end up in terms of governance constructs related to Act 73. And I've heard many times, including from members of this committee, that they believe you got to start with maps. And although I'm not sure that's necessarily the case, it is certainly a place to start, right? So now we've got maps that people can react to and that you folks can react to in general something. I'm not going to comment on whether the preliminary proposed districts are the right combination of merged districts. I don't think there's anybody in Vermont that would look at them and say, oh, that's perfect. Come on, right off, jump that.
And he made that clear.
And he did, in fairness to him. And he asked his committee to think about it over the weekend. And I'm really interested to hear their conversation prior to us sharing any thinking. And our board really has legislative drop-in meetings at 7:30 on Friday mornings. So we haven't even talked about them. They were so new. We looked at the map and stuff, and everybody was like just trying to understand it on Friday morning, a little bit of time. Yeah. So I will say that it appears that he tried to provide district sizes 2,000 to 4,000, which from our perspective, that we came in with a 1,000 to 4,000 proposal. I've testified here about that. We think their testimony or the Representative Conlon's approach is much more aligned with research data than some of the original proposals that were quoting much larger districts or supervisory units. So we went through and did some comments on the sections, and I'll just kind of share that, and then feel free to interrupt me to ask questions on the section where I look to be focused. So section 1, we do agree that the school districts should be the ones to establish policies and procedures for delivery of instruction to the students they serve. We believe in local control, and we believe in local school boards. Obviously, for districts that don't have schools at certain grade levels, we are supportive of contracting with public or approved independent schools, either within or outside of the district as the board deems appropriate. So we think that the school board should be the folks making those decisions. And granted, the school board is going to be overseeing a larger body. I think in every single case in those maps, the school boards will be overseeing a larger body. We may end up with a lot bigger than that, or we may end up with smaller than that. I think she had 27 districts in here, if I remember right. Mm-hmm. So again, we think it should be the local board, whatever that local board ends up being. Section 2A says, this section provides some cleanup language as we move to bigger districts, and provides language to require these new school districts to provide the opportunity to designate students when there isn't locally available public school close by. We say that, of course, parameters need to be established as to what reasonable means. The language 3 or fewer is in current law regarding designation of boards. From the BPA perspective, we are not sure if the number 3 is appropriate or not. And I did just say that in House Ed, and Chair Conlon said that he actually has new language that they're working on that looks at the designation number 3 and maybe considers ways to make that larger. Before you ask me the question, I'm just going to say our worry is if you get really big and you have a school, let's say it's on the west side of this new district that doesn't operate certain grades, and the only place in that new district that does is way over here, or even outside the district is way over here, and there's a school outside of that district that offers those grades. We don't want kids on the bus for an hour and a half when there's a really good independent school or really good public school that just happens to be outside of their new district next door. We want any decision to be kid focused. So that's why we are a little worried about the designation number 3, which is current law. But he did say that they were looking. Sorry.
So on section 1, I'm going back to that.
Yes.
Increase these union, and now we have school boards. How do you believe that actually keeping local control on that size of district?
Well,
everybody wants local control,
right.
And whether we do one big one or even if we cut down, I don't see that. I think there's got to be something better than just doing one school board per district, but I see a flaw in that, and I'm asking you, because of that, do you feel or do you believe that you would get good local control having school boards be for 27 27 different districts. Do you believe we'd have good local control with that?
I think we could. I think one of the problems right now, if we look at the research on school board elections, almost 90% of our elections, nobody runs or one person runs. So there's no competition there whatsoever. In fact, as a superintendent, I spent a lot of my time begging people, please run for the school board in Berkshire. We need you. Please run for the school board in Municipal. But we couldn't get people to run. So I think there's a possibility of that. I think when you get too big, you lose local control. I think when you're too small, you have minute control. You get people sometimes will be on boards just because they have a particular agenda. And I want a governance group that's up here that's focused on policy and leaves the actual day-to-day running of the schools, the superintendent and principals, the people that are the experts. And they're the ones that set the vision for where the district goes. So that would be my answer to that. And you've asked me before, I think about like advisory councils and things like that. I think if those are created well, they can be effective too, so that people in a town can have some input into what's actually going on in their school on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Does that answer that,
Yeah,
Carolyn?
it does. You can go up with things.
I think I just did section 2A, yeah, did. Section 2B1, we think having a contract makes sense. Contracts spell out the obligation. So if I'm the superintendent of the sending district and I'm sending my kids to another place to be educated, we should have to have a contract that says, here are the expectations both ways. Having it in writing makes sense to us. To go further with that, section 2B2, Representative Conlon put in language around approved independent schools that receive public funds, following most of the same rules as public schools. We think this is especially important as we're trying to make sure our education finance system is responsible and accountable to all Vermonters, and that we as a state take appropriate responsibility for all Vermont children as a common good. So 2A, first one, special education. We think this is a simple fairness procedure, and from my perspective, my perspective, the four historics are already doing this. Attendance reports allow schools to work closely together, make sure students are actually attending school. There's a bill that I just testified on about chronic absenteeism and what a problem that is across the nation. We had a couple cases last year. One case that I know where a public school was receiving kids. Now, it wasn't a Vermont public school, but it was receiving Vermont kids. And there were kids that didn't go to school for like 2-3 months. And the superintendent was never told. And there's another case where a kid was going to an independent school in Vermont, not at one of the historics, an independent school in Vermont. And the kid was out of school for 2-3 months, and the district was still paying the bill and never found out that the kid wasn't going to the school. So I think that this would take care of that. Sending districts should know the academic progress of the students when they're paying educational services. It's a major flaw in the system right now. Boards simply pay the bill and they're not privy to how well their kids are doing. I think we should share that information with the school board who's responsible for the kid. Again, we got to follow FERPA, we got to follow privacy laws.
Why would they ask for that now?
They do ask for it, and sometimes they're told no. They have no authority to get it. I mean, we've had school boards go to the AOE, try to pressure schools into serving the data, sharing the data, and the schools have said no. That's current status.
Independent school
Independent.
specifically.
Not all of them, but certainly some of them, yeah. Suspension and expulsion is another area. Sometimes kids get suspended and we don't even find out about it. I had that happen to me as a superintendent. I had a kid I was paying tuition for him to go to school in Canada. Hampstead, they call it Hampstead College, but it's really high school. And the kid was out of school for 2-3 months and we were never even told about it. We're still sending him a bill. Finally, we find out from the parent, oh yeah, he got kicked out of school because of X. And they sent him all that money. We didn't get a refund. So issues like that. Of course, we support the Vermont Public Accommodations Act, the Vermont Fair Employment Act. Folks passed those laws, and obviously we support that. We agree admission process for students should be a blind process. I was asked by a representative in Health Ed today, what if a person applies to a ski school that happens to be getting public money? And I said, well, if they're crazy enough to do that, you admit them. If they can't be on the ski teams, they don't know how to ski. Like if I tried to go there, that's my problem. But I think the chances of that happening are pretty slim. We do think that a blind process is the most fair way to do it. Again, it's about common good. And if we're using public money for it, then all kids should have the basic dignity to apply. This goes a little bit to you, Senator Weeks. I think about you when I wrote this. We think knowing how well students do on state or federally mandated assessments should happen. We think that independent schools should share the grades with the public school and with the AOE. That doesn't happen right now, so not in every place at least, so we think that should happen. We should not be charging students any fees for being a student in any schools that receives public funding. So if I have a private school, I have a grandson that, full disclosure, goes to a private hockey academy in Connecticut, lives in St. Albans, parents in St. Albans. St. Albans doesn't pay any money for them to go to school. His parents pay it or he gets scholarships. If his parents were getting him to go there and St. Albans was paying for it, I don't think that'd be appropriate because they do discriminate against kids. They only accept certain kids to go there. They don't have blind officials.
That was for hockey school.
Yeah, it was in Mid-Fairfield.
Okay.
We have no problems with assurances for independent school leaders. We know most of the independent school leaders, they're honest people that want to do a good job. We know that they're similar to superintendents when they sign those assurances. They're not going to sign their name on a dotted line saying they're providing something if they're not providing it. So we have full confidence in our independent school leaders. We support statements of non-discrimination assurances that state that schools are following BPAA and fair employment practice. And we agree again that the assurance signed by the head of school that no public funds are being used to subsidize the tuition of a private payer student is appropriate to safeguard. Finally, the VPA doesn't see a path forward in our educational delivery system without partnership with our 4 historic academies. We need them as part of our system. There's no question in our minds that there's a part for them in our system. But we also think there's a part for private payer, non-approved independent schools. If I want to send my kid to a school that doesn't qualify in the new law, I guess the 18 schools that qualify now. If I want to send my kid to Rice, or again, my grandson getting gone to Fairfield probably would have gone to Rice. He would have been paid for the law changed. Now he's an 8th grader. Now he wouldn't be. So even if he was to come back and play hockey in Vermont, he decided to go to Rice, his parents would have to pay the bill. We think that's appropriate because it's a school that can exclude some kids for religious reasons. If the school is open to everybody, then it should be blind admission. Take any questions you have.
Does the Vermont Principals Association include principals of independent schools?
Yes. Yeah. In 2 ways. You can be a member. So if you're a member as a principal, then you can get legal services from us. You get our weekly memo. You get discounts for all of our professional learning. Or your school could be a member. And if your school's a member, that enables you to play in sports, participate in the GOV, in the drama program, robotics, all those types of things. We have some independent school members that are, the headmaster is a member of the VPA and the school is. We have others where just the school is. We might even have a couple where just the headmaster is, like a really small elementary school. They might want to be a member, but their school isn't a member because maybe they only go up to 3rd or 4th grade. They don't participate in sports or something.
So I do recognize that VPA was maybe originally founded around the competitive sports.
1915.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do your independent schools participate in your policy developments?
They do if they have a member on our board. 2 years ago, the St. John's Street CTE director was on our board. Right now, we do not have an independent school member on our board.
Thank you.
That's a great question. You want to know the composition of our board? I tell you real quickly, 12 principals, active principals, and these are all by our bylaws. 12 active principals, 1 CTE director, and they recommend to us who the CTE director is.
Is that a seat for CTEs?
It's a seat on our board that has to be an active
Dedicated to-
CTE director. Yeah. 1 assistant principal and then 1 retired principal. And that's been on our bylaws since I was a board member back in 1990.
So that's just for the VPA.
Just for the VPA's executive.
The organization that does the sports. right?
Yeah, part of what we do is that's how we were founded. Around 1990, 91, 92, the VPA started getting more into policy, and now we're much more into policy legislation, but we still oversee sports.
What's the rationale for an assistant principal? Just out of curiosity.
Well, to be honest with you, that's a great question. In Vermont, we have less assistant principals than any place else in the United States, other than North Dakota, where Tyler is.
Per what?
Assistant principals?
Per what? Per student, per principal?
Yes. Yes. Oh, and the reason for it is we're so small. Now, typically in most states, the assistant principal gets developed as an assistant principal and moves into the principal pathway. In Vermont, the assistant principal is so few of them, it's usually a person who is a classroom teacher or a special teacher, like an art teacher or an instructional coach that moves right to principalship. So one of the reasons in Vermont around 2015, the legislature passed a law that said all new principals would get 2 years of mentoring. Because we have principals that come right from the class with the principal and they're like, oh my God, I never had an idea of how tough this job
2
is.
years of what?
Mentoring.
Interest.
Yeah, Vermont is one of the few states that has a law in the books that school districts must provide mentoring the first 2 years that you're a principal in Vermont.
So this would, this language would change for most of the kids going to independent schools are one of the 4 academies, the vast majority. And this would change the relationship between those academies and the towns that they've had historic relationships with for under 4 years in most cases.
I don't know. The way, you saw our testimony, we proposed that we leave it up to the local board.
Yeah.
This is different because it's maps. But the way I was thinking about it was if I'm a new St. J from St. J Academy, these kids all go to the high school, there'd be a new board around there and that board would decide where the kids go. You have to talk to Representative Conlon about exactly what he means here.
Yeah.
The way I read this though would be if you were sending your kids to St. J Academy and you had a district that St. J Academy wasn't part of, then maybe they couldn't send their kids there. Yeah, I'm not really sure.
Right. That's fine. So you kind of went through, Bill. So and so just to go back to the beginning, you haven't really had a chance to analyze the maps and what they.
No, and I may not tell you what we think, because I think we're going to be all over the place. Principals.
Yeah, and the reason for that would be because of specific boundaries or.
I think most of our members, certainly our board, is convinced, and many of them are in SUs, that supervisory districts make more sense. Because and I've given you testimony before how we can show it's better for kids, and for protecting teachers in the long run. Makes it for better governance structures. It doesn't have a whole bunch of bosses. It's just one chain of command system. So I think I know our board is supportive of that. I think when people look at it and say, well, is our town really going to be with this other town? Maybe we'd be better off if we were this town. I don't think we should get into the minutiae about that. The job of the principal is going to stay pretty much the same, right? And, it's an existential change for the school boards or the superintendents. From our perspective, we're still going to run the schools on a day-to-day basis. We do think having a linear chain of command is better than having, supervisory unions, these weird structures, having just like every other state in the United States, nobody else has supervisory unions. Just having a supervisory district makes sense. We have opinions about the maps. And I looked at my own district and when I first was like, I don't really like this part of it, but I don't think it's appropriate for us to really weigh into that at this point. If that's okay with you.
Yeah, I think it's worth emphasizing that the role of principal, the relationship between principal and parents and principal and staff and principal and students isn't going to change in any of these scenarios we're talking. I think that's really important.
Same with teachers.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that from the principal level down,
You're right. I agree.
nothing's going to change
I agree.
in the foreseeable future.
I agree.
I think we're missing that point.
I think,
More and more
I think, I don't think I'm missing that point, but I think many people in the community are, and I tried to say with the commission. I haven't heard anybody here in this organization say we should close small schools. I said it should just come out. And we said over and over, we're not advocating closing small schools. We're advocating that local communities decide that. If they feel that a school gets too small to serve its need, then that is an option that would be on the table.
You need to look at your if it's fiscally responsible to keep a school open, that your town can afford it. And it's a hard decision but the community should have a very large input on that.
And are you able to provide the educational services for your kids that they need to have to be successful today and moving into the future? That should be our number one guiding north star.
So being said, that you're like your tuition in dollars, that you're worried like you said your grandson or is going to college, So he's going to a
He's eighth
full
grade.
8th grade, and so he's going to a complete school from
Yep.
A to Z.
Yep.
And if we do foundation formula, why would you, as a parent or even a grandparent, be upset that that money follows into that school, even though it's a private school? As a parent, that's what they believe their child is getting the best education. What concerns me when people are like, oh, just public dollars, public schools, is I know my child better. And if I believe, we saw it, almost said, if you watch people drive by Rutland to go over to Woodstock, same in this difference, that why that money shouldn't follow that student, even though it's not public dollars. Because it's not that, it's, I think the average is 85% go to the public school. So my concern or question would be, why do people worry so much about that? That, hey, they're going to go to a private school that does have some restrictions, because I know some parents that don't want to send their children to public school because they don't have any restrictions. So
I think that's the parent's choice, but it's the parent's choice that the parent needs to pay for. When it's public dollar, this is my opinion, and this is BPA's opinion too, we've talked about this over and over again. When it's public dollars, there's a common good, and there's a certain expectation that the government, you folks, represent the government, have to set. And we set those with public schools. In private schools, we can discriminate. So the school my grandson goes to, she's had great experience. They decided they don't want to take kids that are certain, say they were religious, they don't happen to be, they could be. They don't want to take kids from a certain religion, or they don't want to take kids because they think that their gender politics is different, or because their family's poor, or because they're different ethnic, background. They could do that. And we should, in my opinion, we should never use public dollars to further divide our nation. It should all be about coming together. So that's kind of the opinion we have. Private school, nothing wrong with private schools. But if it's a private school, if my grandson goes to private school, I think he should either get scholarships, or his parents, or his grandparents should help it.
It's good for too.
So, anything else? Okay, well, you're our first bit of testimony on this.
Okay, thank you.
Hear more. And we actually have a break because we couldn't get a next witness until, I think, down in 3:15 now. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Is that what you're here
Yeah.
for? The next witness?
Okay. Yeah. So we can go on. So we can go